Today's talk is entitled Preparing to be Moved. And our idea is preparing to be moved from, what we've been talking about all month, from race consciousness to grace consciousness. And that is our theme for this month. Race consciousness, as we have noted in the past weeks, has nothing to do with an individual's race or color or ethnic origin, but rather it refers to the accumulated collective thoughts, feelings, and beliefs, and values, and attitudes, and words, and actions that the human race, which, has agreed upon as the human race, and we're all subjected to this. So Science of Mind founder Ernest Holmes said it this way in the Science of Mind textbook, and I shared this quote last week. He said, "The collective unconscious contains a record of all human events that have ever transpired." It's quite a lot. We are all more or less subject to this collective thought, and I will add feelings, beliefs, values, attitudes, words, and actions. The sum total of all erroneous human belief binds until the individual mentally lifts himself above the law of averages. And the law of averages is another term for race consciousness. You know, who wants to strive to be average, right? Or normal. You have to rise above that. And rise above that into the higher law of spiritual individualism. So that's what we're all looking at doing here, is rising into our own expression of individual spiritual expression. So I'm suggesting that the higher law of spiritual individualism is when we bring God into the picture. And when we bring God, represented by the G that is in front of grace, to bring it to grace, we get grace consciousness. And we can take a lesson from the master teacher Jesus, the Christ, in preparing the way for our movement from race to grace consciousness when he prepared for the events that led up to his ascension, which we celebrated on the first Sunday of this month, which seems a year ago already to me, Easter Sunday. Doesn't it seem like it was so long ago? This morning, we are going to prepare the way for our ascension of consciousness, our expansion of life, our forward movement into a greater degree of livingness, with a few words about preparing to be moved from race to grace consciousness. This morning, I want to give you just one thing to think about, one practice to prepare us to move from race to grace consciousness, using our master teacher Jesus' preparation as our example and teaching tool. We all remember that before his crucifixion, Jesus he rode right into Jerusalem, and he did this against his human judgment. There was that in him that said, "Let this cup pass from me." But he traveled the road ahead because he knew that he needed the growth that it would bring. Perhaps you are here this morning because you've reached an inner decision to enter into your Jerusalem that will lead to the death of being influenced by the race consciousness and into a life of grace, a new life, a new livingness, new purpose and visions, new excitement, new joys, new experiences, new demonstrations of who you really are. Go back a little and try to identify with the mental attitude of Jesus on that day. It's very important to understand this because it prepares us to be moved. He knew that the death of his physical body was at hand, and frankly, from the human perspective, he was afraid. And frankly, who wouldn't be, right? I mean, it's terrifying, especially the Hollywood version. If you've been watching any of the shows, it is just to put yourself in his place. In Matthew, we are told a few days after arriving into Jerusalem with the people heralding him as king, he ate Passover with his disciples. When that was complete, he took Peter and 2 others with him to a place called Gethsemane. And he said to them, "My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. Stay here and watch with me." He went a little farther and fell on his face and prayed, saying the same thing not once, not twice, but 3 times. "Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me." Have any of us ever prayed like that?
Oh, yeah.
Have any of us just repeated and repeated, please let this not be. Please let it be different. I'm sure. I know I have. Yes. He was afraid, but in an instant he was boisterous, and he said, "But if this cup cannot pass, and if I must drink it, then let it not as I will, but as thou wilt. Let it not as I will, but as thou wilt." These are the ultimate words of surrender, and surrender is required if we are to move from race to grace consciousness. We must surrender to the power for good in this universe, which is God. And I want to be very clear about something. First of all, the word surrender, I don't know about you, but when I was first in this teaching and they talked about surrender, that just didn't have a good feeling to me. I didn't like that word very much. I'm kind of partial to the phrase. Has anybody seen Galaxy Quest? It's the spoof on Star Trek, anyway, the aliens come back to a convention, and the person who would have been Captain James T. Kirk, it's Tim Allen, and they think that they really are truly. It was a TV show, but they think that they were real, right? And so they don't realize that they're aliens wanting them to come and save their future. And their motto is never surrender, never give up. And so it's like, oh yeah, never surrender, never give up. So yeah, I had some work to do with the word surrender. But oftentimes the will of God has been used to explain away those experiences we would just as soon not have had. This is why you think, yeah, it just doesn't feel right, right? It must have been when somebody says, "Oh, you lost your job, it must have been God's will." Right, okay. Your house burned down, it must have been God's will. It must have been God's will that you got sick. It must have been God's will that your spouse left you. It can even be taken a step further to say that God's will is a punishment for your sins. Anybody ever hear that? Oh my gosh. I didn't hear that much as a child, but I did hear it as I got to know other religions that taught that kind of thing. And those most definitely are race consciousness beliefs, aren't they? There's a group out there that truly believe that this is how it works. And a lot of people just kind of step in line with that. Okay, they just go with that. And even in the New Thought movement, we've given surrendering to God's will a bad rap, since we are usually so focused on the "and we can use it" portion of Ernest Holmes' statement, which is there is a power for good in the universe, and we can use it. And it's not bad that we stay focused on that. It is up to us. It is our will. If it's to be, it's up to me. To quote the title of one of the late, and it's so sad that it is the late Robert Schuller. I was so sad to hear of his passing, but that was one of his books. If it's to be, it's up to me. But Holmes explains God's will beautifully in The Science of Mind, and this is when it all came together for me. This is when I got clarity. He says, true prayer must be "thy will be done." But the implication relative to the will of God in this prayer is not a submission to the inevitability of evil or limitation. It is the knowledge, and this is the important part, that the will of God is always good. Always good. How could it be anything? God knows nothing unlike itself, and God is good. And that is a deep, powerful spiritual truth that we want to move into this morning. There is a power for good in this universe, and we can trust it. We can trust this power. Therefore, because we can trust it, we can surrender to it. I love Einstein's statement. He says, "I think the most important question facing humanity is the universe a friendly place?" This is the first and most basic question all people must answer for themselves. What do you think? Is the universe a friendly place? Yes. And his answer, Einstein's answer, was yes, it is. What we are surrendering to, what we are letting go to, what we are releasing to is a higher dimension of ourselves that is greater than ourselves as we know it and as we know us. So let me say that again, because this is the key. This is the key to what I'm talking about this morning. When we surrender to the will of God, the will of good, we are surrendering to a higher dimension of ourselves that is greater than who and what we know ourselves to be. In fact, when we surrender to the will of God, we are surrendering to the next stage of our own evolution. Well, that's pretty darn exciting, I think. And when we surrender to God's will, we are moving from race to grace consciousness. So in actuality, when we surrender, we are opening a space in us to let God become more conscious as itself, as us. To let love express more of itself as us. To let abundance reveal more of itself as us. To let wholeness make known more of itself as us. Now that sounds a whole lot like grace to me. Does it sound like grace to you? Mm-hmm. And this is what Jesus did in the garden. After he prayed not once, not twice, but 3 times to let this cup pass for him, he surrendered. He surrendered to the Father's will of his higher self, the truth of his being. And this is how we move from race to grace consciousness, by surrendering our small thinking mind, controlled by the consciousness of humankind, up to this point, to the mind of our higher self, the divine knower within. And in this place, why should we ever worry? Why should we ever worry? In fact, worry is a complete and total misuse of our powerful mental faculty of imagination. Wow, why would we want to imagine something that we don't want to experience? So let me say that again, because this is where the rubber meets the road. Worry is a complete and total misuse of our powerful mental faculty of imagination. So I want to share a wonderful story that I found, and it's written by Christine Closer, and she is a spiritual guide. And she writes, and you'll see why I kind of like this story. I have always loved roller coasters. Thank goodness, getting stuck on the loop-de-loop coaster as a child didn't deter my desire to ride again, but it was as an adult where I began to see roller coasters as spiritual teachers. Stay with me and you'll see why. Roller coasters are like life. There are lots of ups and downs, twists and turns, ins and outs. They require surrender to be enjoyed. So here's my coaster surrender story. It was a Sunday morning and my family, along with my sister and 2 girls, were packed in the car ready for a day at Hershey Park. Which, okay, it's not Disneyland, but Hershey Park's pretty cool, I think. All right, so the excitement was high, especially because my daughter and younger niece were finally tall enough to go on all of the roller coasters. So it was going to be a very different day at Hershey, unlike the days in the past where we'd be in line for the choo-choo train and the kiddie coaster. The first big coaster we hit was the Great Bear. You're suspended from the top track and your feet dangling in the air as you twist and turn and flip and loop your way on a coaster that roars like a bear as it zips along. I'd been on this coaster before and loved it very much. And I loved it as much this week as I did when I first went on it. It was an extra joy to hear my daughter and nieces, who'd never ridden it before, say they loved it and wanted to go again. We played a game to prepare them for the coaster. I asked, "What's the most important thing to remember?" They'd respond, "Buckle in and keep your head back." I asked, "What's the next most important thing to remember?" They responded, "Breathe and relax." I asked, "What's the next important thing to remember?" They respond, "Laugh and scream like crazy." And so they did. After Great Bear, we went on the Storm Runner, which shot you out using a jet propulsion, so you went from 0 to 70 miles per hour in 2 seconds flat. Again, it was one that I'd been on before and loved, and so did the girls after their first time around. On and on we went, but the one coaster that kept eluding us was Fahrenheit. I'd seen this coaster for years, but the vertical lift, inverted loop coaster, which ascends 121 feet before plummeting down a 97-degree drop, didn't seem to be in the cards that day. Okay, my palms are just sweating thinking about this. Yeah. Okay, that line was way too long. The hairpin loop, 100 feet in the air, looked quite intimidating, and I was totally okay with not going on it. Then, about 15 minutes before the park closed, we stopped at Fahrenheit, after I'd pretty much assured myself that I was too exhausted to go on it. This time the line was much shorter. The awe of the hairpin loop against the starry sky now lured me in. As tired as I was at 10 p.m., I put forth the effort to stand in line with my sister and one of my nieces as our turn finally approached. Finally, there I am ascending the 120-foot vertical lift, lying in my seat harness, totally perpendicular to the ground. I can see nothing but the vast night sky above me. I did what the girls told me to do. what I told the girls to do. I kept my head back. I took a deep breath and relaxed, and then I giggled like crazy, and I couldn't stop laughing. For the full length of the ride, I was cracking up, a side-splitting laugh that I couldn't stop if I tried. With every corkscrew loop and descent, my giggling increased. I had totally and completely let go and allowed the coaster to take me on a phenomenal ride. All along, I was thinking of how indicative the coaster was of life. That when you let go and allow yourself to surrender to the flow, you end up having much more fun. That's when you ride the ups, that when you ride the ups and downs without resistance, you come out feeling better. That no matter how turned around you get, as long as you continue to let yourself be guided, you will always end up safe back home. You'll find yourself exactly where you meant to be, and better for having taken the journey. To me, this is what surrender looks like. It is trusting that something greater than you knows exactly where you're meant to be and how you're meant to get there. It's allowing yourself to let go of your own will and let the ride, the flow, carry you. It's facing the ups and downs with equal enthusiasm because they are both needed for you to arrive at your divine destination. It's about embracing the journey with all your heart rather than only being focused on the end. It's about laughing as you look ahead and have no idea where you're going. It's about being fully awake, fully alive, and fully aware of this moment right now. So whether you're riding roller coasters at the amusement park or the ups and downs of your life, I hope you are abundantly blessed with the gift of surrender. And may this ride be the best ride you could ever wish for. So are you willing to release worry and fear and doubt and dread and surrender into God's grace as in and as and through your life? This is what we've discussed this morning. And this is how we prepare to be moved from race to grace consciousness. And so it is.